the big question that I think many of us fail to ask and really should ask today is, who are we? What makes us human? What makes us such a special species? And why do we do what we do on planet Earth? And so, are we just this super intelligent upright ape? Or, we're certainly very polluting, wasteful, and don't really think about the survival of our species as a whole, and we should probably do something better about it. But the reason we do this is all down to this large brain that we have. And is that large brain a good evolutionary adaptation? I don't know yet. We'll see. That's going to be our challenge. But one thing we do know is that Homo erectus had this larger brain, and it was the first hominid to walk out of Africa 1.8 million years ago. And anything that we find outside of Africa post-dates 1.8 million years. And so we have been able to show through the fossil finds made in Africa that this is where we came from at that time. So we all have an African origin at that time. And until 30,000 years ago, there were probably at least three upright walking apes that shared planet Earth. And the fact that we're here today as a single species is a really very new situation to be in. So, I just clarify that, the Neanderthals went extinct about 30,000 years ago, and then there were these small little 1 meter high hobbit-like men that you've all read about that were found in Indonesia that were there as recently as 30,000, possibly 18,000 years ago. So the fact that today it's just us is very, very unusual indeed. So I said we all come from Africa, and not only did we evolve and move out of Africa as Homo erectus, Homo sapiens evolved there in some earlier form 600,000 years ago, and then Homo sapiens, you and I, big-brained, nothing different, evolved in Africa again. We know that also from molecular evidence 200,000 years ago, and we only left Africa 75,000 years ago to populate the globe. So it's been a very recent spread, and you can see this map that's on the wall here shows movement into the Middle East, across to Australia quite rapidly, and then across into North America as recently as 15,000 years ago. And my goodness, when people move, they do damage. And so we so rapidly probably wiped out the Neanderthals and very quickly became the only species on planet Earth in terms of as Homo sapiens. Here we go in terms of skin color, because this question comes up all the time. And I just wanted to touch on this briefly, because the work of Nina Jablonski and George Chapman has shown that it's not just the fact that dark skin protects us from ultraviolet light, but it's reproductive success. It's the fact that sunshine destroys folate, and everybody knows that you're given folic acid supplements if you're pregnant because it helps your offspring not to have neural tube defects. And so if you're at the equator, you don't want the sunshine to destroy the folic acid, so you become dark-skinned. Further north, dark skin prevents you from getting your vitamin D, which is the sunshine vitamin, and sunshine vitamin and vitamin D helps to synthesize your production of calcium, and you need calcium for strong bones. And dark-skinned people, if they don't have supplements further north, end up with serious rickets. And so this is the reason behind it, and it takes the wind out of the sails of all of the people who have issues with race. It's a very recent phenomenon that we've got out, and in the big mix-up that we are today in terms of skin color, it's unusual to be and to live where we are long periods of time. So that, I just wanted to touch on that briefly. And I think the other important thing for people to realize today is that we've only been here for a tiny, tiny window of time. And people have no problem if I tell you to think about $4.6 billion. Bill Gates is worth $53 billion or something like that. I mean, we can conceptualize money, but when it comes to time, we do have a lot more problem. And to understand how short a period of time we've actually been on planet Earth seems to be even more difficult for people to understand. And so I decided I would put a little picture together here, which with the help of my daughter, I rolled out a tube of a roll of toilet paper down a hillside here. And you can see at the very top the molten Earth 5 billion years ago. And it comes down and down and down. And this is 400 sheets of tissue paper long. And the dinosaurs go extinct here, 5 sheets from the very end. And here on the very last sheet, you can see this one square, 12 million years. That last half there is where apes walked upright. Okay, a last common ancestor with the apes, essentially. And then Homo sapiens comes in here, and the last 2 millimeters of the last square of toilet paper. And just in that very short window of time, we go from very few people on planet Earth to this extraordinary number here, with close to 7 billion people on this planet. 200,000 years, 7 billion people at 80 million people a year. And these are frightening statistics. And how did that happen? You know, it's never, something happened that made this possible. And this is it. It is agriculture. It's the onset of agriculture. Suddenly, we could produce food to make us step outside of the normal constraints for population. And so our numbers were able to increase to these extraordinary levels. And contentious as it may be today, all about changing climate, but we should have been going into the Ice Age 7,000 years ago. And it's the Ice Age that just never happened. And it probably never, ever will happen ever again, so long as we're around. Turning off that freezer is very easy. Turning it back on again is nearly impossible. And so that was all because with agriculture, with the domestication of livestock, suddenly carbon dioxide levels began to rise at an alarming rate. And so we then began to affect every ecosystem that there is on planet Earth today, without exception. We began to change the water cycle. Rivers that used to take water from mountaintops to the sea no longer get to the sea in some places. In fact, there is probably not a river in the world that isn't interrupted today by reservoirs. There apparently is more water, fresh water, held up in reservoirs today than there is in all the world's rivers. And so that vital link of taking fresh water from mountaintops that absorbs carbon dioxide, takes it to the sea where these animals then absorb it and fall to the bottom. The carbon sink, the natural carbon sink, is suddenly gone. Our dependence on oil is obvious as well. It's alarming how much oil we use in a year. 31 billion barrels a year, which takes 3 million years to produce 1 year's worth of oil that we burn. I mean, these are incredible statistics. I'm not sure how long we can keep this up for, and this is what I think it's important to realize in terms of how short a period we've actually been here on planet Earth. And it's not to say that carbon dioxide levels have never been up to these high levels. They were 55 million years ago. We had a massive amount of carbon dioxide from all the methane that was produced to this event, and it was way up there. But the saving grace was the Himalayas, which came up, and again, massive mountains, as these plates collided, were formed, and these mountains, which began to erode away, the ice and meltwater acted as this massive carbon sink for us. But we can't build these mountains to try and control these levels of carbon dioxide in today's world. And so it leaves me only to bring you on to this one in terms of the great extinctions, the 5 great extinctions that planet Earth has seen. We are in the 6th right now, and it's because of our actions that we are in the 6th extinction, and we are taking out, as a result of our presence on planet Earth and our inability to preserve species, 30,000 species a year. Now, this doesn't bode well for the future, but it's a truly dramatic time, the age of man on planet Earth. So these majestic animals, this is our last essentially living common ancestor, the great apes, this mountain gorilla, whose habitats are severely threatened by people who have encroached these very small habitats that they remain on. There are only 700 mountain gorillas left in the wild today. How long are they going to be here? Will my children's children get to see them? I do wonder. These were a habituated group of mountain gorillas that were killed as a result of an illegal charcoal trade that's continuing in Virunga National Park in eastern Congo today. My husband is responsible for this national park, and glad to say the situation has changed somewhat on the ground, but for how long will it last? Because you've got a dedicated person in charge of a national park who's prepared to put their life on the line. Yes, we can hold it together for a period of time, but in the bigger picture of things, you do wonder whether it's going to last forever. Ivory, again, huge numbers of elephants have been killed because of their ivory. It continues today. It's not spoken about to the extent that it was before, but more threatening is the illegal trade in other wildlife, smaller animals, and massive amounts of wildlife are being exterminated for protein and are being shipped across the world. It's less so that the elephant is threatened than everything else, but it's still important to realize that the damage is being done. Sharks, 90% of all the sharks have been exploited, have gone from today's oceans. They have been around for 400 million years or so in the oceans. They're absolutely critical for the health of the oceans, and we're taking them out at an alarming rate today. It is absolutely devastating what we're doing to these apex predators. Tuna fish, this was in the news the other day in terms of our greed for sushi and the bluefin tuna, which fetches some $60,000 a fish. It's no wonder that they're going to be exterminated. Now, it's all very depressing stuff. And I think that's why it's so important for people to understand the impact that we're having as a species on the planet. The plastics in the oceans. This is a picture that may reflect what we know about the Eastern Pacific garbage patch, which is a huge jar of ocean currents, which essentially sweeps up all the plastics that are going into the oceans worldwide. It's something like 26 million tons of plastics end up in the world's oceans every year. Trash. And what happens to that trash? It's slowly broken down by UV, but it takes a very, very long time for this to happen. It gets into all the fish, into the toxins sort of trickle down, and we all know how dangerous that is. But I just wanted to put that into context. Here you've got the Grand Canyon, which records about half of the history of the Earth in its layers of rocks, like layers of a book or layers of a cake. Millions and millions of years of marine sediments are deposited in this fantastic landform, which essentially a river's cut down over the past 6 million years to expose these rocks. And you can just imagine what's going to be left after the age of man, the Anthropocene, is a nice layer of plastic in one of these ones. And then it's gone, and then it'll go back to being. But that's a good thing. It's a very positive thought, and I think this is something that we mustn't look at negatively by any means. And I think this really sums it up. Unless we change the direction we're heading, we might end up where we are going. But as a species, this big brain that we have, you know, we like to think of ourselves as special and different. And I think this really is our chance to prove it, to really see if we can rally together and do what it takes to ensure our survival and the survival of many other species that will extend beyond the generation that we live in. And our inability to think too far ahead in the future isn't a good thing, and we've really got to make sure that we educate the younger generation and to make sure that we don't exceed our population, the carrying capacity of the Earth in terms of our population. We're just very, very bad at controlling our numbers, and I think this is something that we've got to deal with in the future. And on that note, I will turn it over to you for some questions. I'd be very happy to answer them. All right, then you can all go home.